Hello class 6. Today I am going to begin with another beautiful story, Selfish Giant, by famous writer of English, Oscar Wilde. Now this story tells us about the human natures of selfishness, then understanding the mistake, realizing the mistake and rectifying that mistake. It is a very beautiful story, heartwarming. Let us see how the story goes. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there, over the grass, stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that, in the springtime, broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here!" they cried to each other. Now it happened so that there was a beautiful garden, but that garden belonged to a giant. And whenever the children got out from their schools, when the school got over, every day, every afternoon after the school, the children used to go to that garden and play, because that it was a very beautiful, the garden, there were flower plants, colorful flower plants. The entire garden was surrounded by 12 peach trees, and they used to bloom. They used to blossom during the springtime, and they used to bear the tasty, delicious fruits during the autumn season. And the grass was soft and lush and green, and the children loved to play over there. And they used to talk to each other, tell to each other that they were very lucky to have that garden to their play. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. So for the past 7 years, the giant had gone to visit his friend, another giant who lived in Cornwall. So he went over there and he had stayed over there to his friend's house, in his friend's house for 7 long years. So by the time the children were very much familiar with the garden, and they were used to play in that garden. So they considered the garden as their own, like the garden belonged to them. But actually the garden was the property of the giant. So after he finished his visit for over 7 long years, he came back to his garden once again. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw children playing in the garden. Now, when he came back, he found that the children were playing in his garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. Now, very heavy and rude voice, he asked the children, "What are you doing in my garden?" And listening to that kind of rude voice, the children got afraid and they ran away from there. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that. and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself. So he built a high wall all round it and put up a notice board. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Now, he said that this is my garden and only I have the right to play in it, nobody else. So, saying this, what did he do? He put up a huge wall around, high and huge wall all around the garden. And he put up a notice board also that trespassers will be prosecuted. Now, trespassers, the people who enter into somebody else's property without that person's permission. And prosecution means to be punished. So, this notice the giant had gave. He was a very selfish giant. Now, he did not know how to share his things. So, he was very selfish. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. How happy we were there, they said to each other. Now the poor children, they did not have anywhere to play because the roads were all dusty and full of stones, and it was not smooth and soft like the garden, the lawn in the garden. So they could not play on the streets. So they every afternoon after the school got over, they used to move round and round the high wall of the garden, and they used to remember and talk to each other that how happy we were there when we had the garden to ourselves, when we used to play in there, how happily we used to play, and it was happy time. And they wished that they could get it back, but now the giant was not allowing them to enter into his garden. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Now the spring came, all over the country the trees got the new leaves and the flowers bloom and the birds started chirping, but in the giant's garden it was the spring did not enter into the giant's garden, and the birds also obviously did not come to sing in it, and it was still winter inside the walls of the giant's garden because there were no children inside it. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. So once a small flower started to come up from its bed in the ground, but when it looked around itself, it found the winter was still there, and then it saw the notice board that nobody was allowed inside the garden. So again it went back to his bed in the ground and went back to sleep. The only people who were pleased there were the snow and the frost. So the only people who were happy, they were the snow and the frost. Now the writer had imagined snow and frost as human beings. So actually they are not human beings, but the writer has imagined them as the human beings or living beings.